Dearest viewer, the time has come to finally talk about how to make the world see us. Let's talk about representation. Because I totally forgot to introduce myself. Let me do it now. You're not missing anything from the video. This is just me gassing myself up for sewing my own gloves. Hi, my name is Sina Pot. If you are new, salam, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have been here before, thank you so much for coming back. If you like this video, please subscribe. So today is all about representation. We're talking about what it is, why it matters, and how to apply it in business, branding, and in your life. I know representation has been one of those words that has garnered popularity through wokeness and the woke movement. I am really tired of seeing representation in every single space, even if it doesn't make sense, and then not seeing it in the spaces where it actually does make a difference. But as you might have seen, this is a Bridgerton-inspired video. One of the reasons is because I'm going to talk a little bit more about Shonda Rhimes, the producer of Bridgerton, as well as her remarks around representation and what she does in her work and what we can learn from it and what brands can learn from it. And the other part is I'm just having too much fun with the Bridgerton theme. I don't know if you've seen it in the introduction, but I'm having too much fun. Someone should stop me, honestly. I'm also curious to see throughout the video if any of you can guess which outfit is inspired by which character in Bridgerton. And we only talk about season 2 because we don't claim season 1. Thank you very much. I just wanted to do that for ASMR purposes. This video is structured in 3 parts: external representation, internal representation, and what representation actually matters. So let's first talk about the definition of representation and why it matters for businesses, brands, and for you personally. Okay, the problem with gloves is that I can literally not touch anything. All my notes are gone now. Yes, I'm actually doing this. Okay, all the items that I'm wearing, I either already had or I made it. So I made gloves from scratch. All my clothes are either from my grandmother, my mom, or thrifted, or I actually got them from local markets, like the jewelry that I got from a visit to Kolkata. I had so much fun. It's not going to be historically accurate, but that is part of the fun. Why I wanted to create a video about representation was not only inspired by one of Shonda Rhimes' latest TV productions, Bridgerton, but also by the conversation that we have in general in industries and brands that I work with, or in spaces that I find myself with other people from diverse backgrounds. And representation matters both to companies, brands, and individuals, and that is why we're going to look at the vast land of representation and what it means. For this video specifically, my inspiration came from a specific quote of Shonda Rhimes. If you don't know Shonda Rhimes, she's a producer, the founder of Shondaland, a production company that produced a lot of TV shows that you're familiar with, including Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, and lately Bridgerton. And one of the terms that she coined was, you cannot be what you cannot see. And it's really what encompasses the idea of representation and what it means to us all. But before we can look at how it affects our lives, we have to look at what it actually means. Representation as a word has different meanings in different contexts. So generally speaking, representation is the way that someone or something is shown or described. Representation in media means the fact of including different types of people, for example in films, politics, or sports, so that all different groups are represented. And when we talk about representation in the context of a work environment or an artistic environment or any space that you can find yourself in, inclusive representation means customizing media systems, products, and services is to reflect the audience's authentic vision of themselves. And that means representation is not only connected to how we see things, but how we react to things as soon as we see them, because we know consumer behavior is always driven by how people are influenced, how much people feel themselves being attracted or spoken to. In the entertainment industry, representation that is visible is depicted mostly by characters. So the main character in a TV show or in a film that represents a specific community.
You cannot be what you cannot see, and the only limits to your success are your own imagination. The lack of inclusion on television is limiting the imaginations of our country. People don't know or have any knowledge of other people, and they don't see them, and they may have never seen them. And when they do see people who don't look like them or worship like them or love like them on TV, they don't recognize them as realistic when they encounter them in real life, because many of the images they are currently getting on TV are not images of three-dimensional real people. And yet that's all they know. The false images they see on their TV are their window to the world.
Representation in brands is also reflected in campaigns. What kind of faces do you have on your ads and brand campaigns? What kind of influencers do you bring into your brand to represent and sell products to their followers? It could also be partners and collaborators that you bring into the brand to work on partnerships. Specifically in the fashion industry, you can see a lot of representation that is visible in terms of companies bringing in partners from the Black community, partners from the Asian community, partners from the LGBTQ community to develop products or to be the faces of their campaigns. As well as much more diverse influencers are now brought into brand activations to activate and sell a product or a brand or an idea that the brand wants to promote. Of course, we know the data. Representation is good for business. In fact, research shows that 59% of minority consumers engage with brands more frequently if they are inclusive of diverse perspectives. And 38% of consumers are more likely to trust brands that do well in showing diversity in their ads. When we look at the example of Bridgerton, unlike season 1, season 2 completely reversed the entire idea of representation and has actually put 2 South Asian women at the center of the plotline, who embrace both their culture as well as their autonomy and identity. And that is why season 2 has converted a lot of Bridgerton haters into Bridgerton fans. Of course, that is the representation that we see on screen, but there's a difference what we see on screen and what is going on behind the scenes. So let's talk about how they got the jump from season 1 to season 2 and what is going on behind the scenes that can help us understand how representation looks like from the inside. Unlike season 1, which, as I said before, I'm not going to claim because we don't like it, Bridgerton season 2 really stepped up its game. One of the things that I found fascinating looking back at the critique that came after season 1 was that people actually pointed out that there was a lack of Asian representation and specifically South Asian representation.
Of more than 1,000 films surveyed in this study produced in Hollywood, less than 4% of characters are of Asian descent, and less than 1% of main characters are of Asian descent. And so I thought that we were going to get at least one Asian character that would play a role in this story. There's a stark contrast between the show advertising itself as a racially integrated Regency society and the complete lack of Asian-speaking roles.
And one of the reasons why they pointed it out was the importance of the representation not only being someone stuck in the background just for color purposes, just like we have in campaigns and brand campaigns, when you see colorful faces on campaign posters, but the people behind the scenes and the employees in the rooms where decisions are being made do not resemble those colorful faces. And that was one of the reasons why the Bridgerton season 2 was so well received, because of the main characters, Kate and Edwina Sharma. The behind the scenes showed that one specific South Asian writer in the writing room actually pushed for the Sharma family and the narrative to be inclusive and representative of immigrants that are taking charge of their autonomy and as well preserve their culture. A lot of times when movies or TV shows try to pull in representation just for the sake of it, they completely fail. We have seen examples like this in the past, whether that is sticking women into men's roles just for the sake of feminism, like Batwoman, I don't know who came up with this, as well as sticking minority groups into roles where the writers, the producers, and the directors have no cultural background to actually represent represent them in an authentic way. One of the examples would be Elite and the Muslim character that has been one of the main characters in Elite. Nobody ever asked for this representation. We don't want this representation. And although I don't want to speak for the entire Muslim community, I am going to speak for the entire Muslim community. That representation was bogus. I don't even know if you say the word bogus. I just hear it in TV shows and movies, and I think that's a good word to say. The Muslim characterization within Elite has shown that there is no Muslim woman in the writing room or directing room that has understanding of the diversity of the Muslim representation, as well as the need to represent someone else other than a Muslim girl wanting to take off her headscarf for some boy. We have seen it over and over again, minority representation that is laughable at best and embarrassing at worst. Maybe not at worst. Maybe it's Islamophobic at worst, or just plain racist at worst. We've seen representation of Muslims praying in movies that were totally wrong. I don't know why they didn't just Google how to pray. And of course, we all know the depiction of minority groups in stereotypical lights, such as the Muslim immigrant as either the terrorist or the oppressed woman, as well as other minority groups such as Black or Asian representation, really pumped into stereotypes of the thug, the rapper, the engineer, or when we take it further, the gay Black best friend that is just there to be sassy. I would highly recommend you to watch Khadija's video about this. I'm linking it down below, where she talks about some of the issues in Bridgerton season 1 and stereotyping. Representation is something that has to come with intention, and that is why it has to be represented internally. If you don't have internal representation, you will see that the external representation is going to be bogus. My favorite word again. Mini break, please don't forget to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button to get the newest and freshest content. If you didn't know, Bridgerton is actually based on a book series by Julia Quinn. And the Sharma family in the book is actually called the Sheffield family, British family, unlike the TV adaptation being South Asian. The South Asian writer in the writing room brought the Sharma family to life in all their non-stereotypical beauty was Kitika Lisardi. I hope I'm not saying this wrong. Please correct me. I hate saying names wrong. I just wanted to say her name. The writer said, "A good story is a good story. Authentically representing a specific culture is the best way to make a show feel universal. And centering a story on people who exist but aren't usually seen is a good business strategy as well as good storytelling. Moral of the story, hire diverse talent and empower them to do their thing." One of the great things that she said here was, the more specific you are, the more universal you become. And that is something that sounds very illogical. If you're very specific, it means that some people might not relate to it. But in reality, specifically in storytelling, the more specific you become, the more a character can depict universal characteristics. So for instance, in the characteristics of Kate, you can see her love for tea, but her Indian tea, not the British tea.
I'm sure we have much to learn from you, such as the preparation of this most excellent tea. Even taught her how to make this pitiful excuse for tea the English so adore. I despise English tea.
You must miss it dearly.
Oh, every minute of every day, but most especially at tea time.
You can also see an Indian tradition called Haldi, which Edwina, Kate, and her mom are doing the day before her wedding. While not everyone will understand the cultural background of those traditions, everyone can connect to the idea of having a ritual that feels familiar, that feels like something that you have from your mom or from your ancestors or from the place you're from. At the same time, everyone has wedding traditions that they do in their culture, so the more specific you become, the more you can understand the love for the small things, you can understand the confidence that the character depicts, and it's something that you can connect to on a personal level. Some examples from internal representation in the entertainment industry would be writers, producers, directors, as well as people who do makeup and hair, as we can often see that traditional makeup artists do not understand how to take care of black hair and darker skin types. In brands, internal representation obviously means employees, people who work in the company. Here it is important to not see only at the lowest level, so inviting a lot of interns of color to come into your company, but where is the representation on the levels and the positions where decisions are being made. And of course, internal representation in brands is also depicted in campaign shootings where you hire a representative agency and people behind the camera to bring your campaign to life. Internal representation is important for businesses and brands if they want to target a new consumer market, because if you don't have the talent and the representation within the company, you will not understand how to authentically communicate with that community outside. It is not about ticking boxes, it's about making sure that when you go to a community or a consumer, they are able to connect with you. It is much easier to connect to someone if you feel like you have something in common with them. And if a brand approaches you where there's no one who looks like you internally, that might turn people off because they might not feel like you understand their culture background, and you make them work really hard to make you understand their requirements. For example, if you're working with a Muslim woman in your campaign, it's always easier to have women at least behind the camera so that the woman feels comfortable saying, hey, you know, this shirt is a bit tight. So if you know that modesty is really important for that specific influencer or for that model that you hired, means that you put behind the camera someone that makes them feel comfortable, where they can easily speak out and say what they prefer. Brands always want to extend their consumer base and their target audience, and if you have the expertise internally to understand what the consumer market wants, how they see your brand already, and where you might need to clean up your image a little bit, as well as what they are expecting from you, what kind of solutions they're expecting from your business, or what kind of message they expect from your brand, that is much easier than trying to just figure it out and potentially getting it wrong. Because as we know, reputation is one of the most difficult things to gain back once it's lost. But internal representation is also important on a personal level. And that is, going back to Shonda Rhimes' quote, you cannot be what you cannot see. Choosing role models has a lot to do with seeing yourself in the role model, whether that is another woman or another person of color, or role models that might not look like us, but where we can see commonalities in character, in upbringing. So where does the idea of role modeling come from? Modeling someone will help you achieve what they achieved or what you want to achieve faster. Modeling is to use a system or procedure as an example to follow or imitate. And you can obviously model a person as well. Neuroscience shows that you can physically change your brain depending on what you continue saying to yourself. But the same applies to visuals that you fill your mind with. So the more you fill your mind with visuals of someone you can relate to in a position of power, the more your brain shapes to become that version that can also become a person in the position of power. And this is something that Shonda Rhimes calls FOD. Shonda Rhimes, when she accepted the Television Hall of Fame award from Oprah, she recalled a time when she was a young girl and she couldn't see anyone like her on TV, so she couldn't imagine herself being out there in the entertainment industry. But as soon as she saw Oprah, her life changed. She suddenly had that perspective of who she could be and where she could go.
Oprah Winfrey changed my imagination. She changed what I found to be imaginable. Any limits to my success suddenly seemed, something clicked, and my imagination had no limits. The world got wider. You cannot be what you cannot see.
She coined the term FOD, first only different, for women like her that would be in industries where they would be the first Black woman in television, or the only Black woman in C-suite executive, or the different person in the room. It would become a term that people would use, specifically of minority backgrounds, when they are in spaces where they are the only, where they are the first, where they are different. Seeing someone that looks like you makes you think different about your own capabilities and opportunities. And when I am in places where I'm an FOD, I not only look at myself in a position of, oh, I'm the minority, there should be more of us, or oh, I'm in a minority, I'm a diversity token. And that's what I call the diversity token dilemma. A lot of times when I speak with diverse talents, the problem a lot of us are facing, before you get into a position, you think you will never get into that position because you are different. Once you get there, you think they hired you only because you're different, because they wanted that colorful face in the room. And it's a dilemma because in neither of those two scenarios you win. But a lot of this has to do with the mindset and the attitude that we bring into the room we enter. We can't come into a room and think, oh, we are a minority, we are the victim, we are going to be faced with racism and Islamophobia and misogyny, because you come in with a negative disposition and you don't give people the real chance that they deserve. which is the same chance you deserve to show who you are without prejudice. If you're an FOD, it's a privilege to be in this position because a lot of others are not. However, that privilege comes with a responsibility, like every privilege does, which is creating spaces for those who come after you. If there would have been someone like you in the position before opening the door for you, it would have been easier. But now you can be that person for others. And a lot of times, as sad as it might be, representation is so glorified that a lot of women or minorities try to take that, being the first, being the only, and wear it as a badge of honor without trying to get other people into the same position or the same chances that they got. And just because someone is represented that is of the same ethnicity or gender or faith doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to create opportunities for us. Just because someone looks like you doesn't mean they have your best interest at heart. As sad as it might be, sometimes we have to look for people who might not look like us, but they are willing to support us and sponsor us. And a lot of times what happens when you get diverse people into leadership positions, they need to prove that they're not just there because they are diverse. So a lot of times they leave diversity work on the ground and just focus on themselves and focus on their own development, which is fine for them, but it means we cannot rely on those people opening doors. Just because there's a person of color in a leadership board doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to help you get there too. A lot of times people think life and opportunities are a pie and there's a certain amount of pieces that you can divide. The world is not a zero-sum game. Some people don't think that way, and that is why you need to make sure that you represent your own interests, that you think of your privilege and responsibility when you are in spaces where you're the only or first or different. On the other hand, even if you don't represent a community that you want to help, you're welcome to support. Sadly, I get a lot of more male mentors and female mentors because of that manufactured competition that a lot of times exists at the top. And for me, it's fine for now, but I don't want to portray that to the next generation. I want to be a woman that opens up doors for other women and young girls. So when we think about representation, it's not so much only about what do we see and what is behind the scenes. It's also what do we want to see? What kind of representation do we actually need? Because not any representation is good representation. Rich representation really matters. I do believe most people think I cannot be what I cannot see, but it requires imagination. And I believe when you are an imaginative person, if you can imagine yourself being somewhere, then you are able to get there. The only limit to my success is my own imagination. I don't need to necessarily see a Muslim woman in the position that I want to hold. It's even enough to see a person that I could connect to because they are authentic or they are straightforward or I share any other characteristic with them. But role models for me do not only come from places that are real, that I can imagine myself in, as for instance the CEO of a big brand or a person that's on the cover of Forbes magazine or someone with 1 million followers or an activist that has changed an entire community or political system. For me, modeling success has also to do with choosing role models in spaces that others might not even look. I have a lot of role models and not all of them are real, not all of them are alive, and not all of them are actually people. It could be a character from a TV show or a movie like Prison Break and the strategy that you can learn from Michael Scofield. Idea of being confident in stressful situations that you learn from Suits. It could be your university thesis supervisor, or it could be an activist that lived 200 years ago. And one of the things that I believe is most important when we look at role models and representation is not thinking that we will be the first, only, or different all the time, but understanding what our ancestors have already put in our way. People that have come before you, who have paved the way for you, those are also role models. They didn't necessarily lead a company or a country or make $1 million, but they did lead change to the point where you can become the person that you want to become because they paved the way for you. Being able to imagine who you want to become directly correlates with where you look. So look for inspiration and imagination, because without imagination, there's no application. You can't apply something that you can't even imagine. And brands are great in elevating that imagination by bringing people to the forefront forefront that we could never imagine in those positions or in that limelight. But brands are not the only place to look for imagination and inspiration. Look around yourself, look at your ancestors, look at your family, look at you. Did I believe I gave a lot of aesthetic inspiration to the Bridgerton writing room on how to incorporate a Muslim character into Bridgerton? Yes. Do I think we need a Muslim character in Bridgerton? Not necessarily. Do you want a Muslim character in Bridgerton? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments below so we can crowdsource some inspiration for the writers or not. As I said before, not all communities want to be represented in all places. Sometimes the values, the space, the brand identity doesn't fit to the community that brand might want to attract. I don't believe we have to rely on brands to represent us and represent our community. I believe we can represent ourselves very well and often way better. But if brands are looking for representation, then do please work with communities because they will understand the nuances of what your brand can naturally talk about or what you should kind of like keep your hands away from. So representation matters, of course, but it matters in the moments when it fits. Not just because you want to brand yourself as progressive or you want brands to be more progressive just for the sake of it. As well as we don't want you to be woke just for the sake of it. We have to start thinking more critically about what we want representation in and where are spaces where we do not need to be included in the conversation. So I hope you could resonate a little bit with it. I would love to hear your thoughts on representation as well as Bridgerton aesthetic in the comments below. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe and share this with someone who wants to see this. And I'll see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.